Alright, and we'll send it down to fix it. Okay.
Really have a fresh coffee.
Thank you.
You like a tomato?
No, I think I'm
If you want, like, we hope we'll have a second.
let me see.
We have this for that's for regular silver. So would you like me to bring you another one?
I think so. How are you?
Hey, Avivah. I forgot you were my professor when you were still Professor Gottlieb many years ago. You and I communicated many times. I was Susan Hendelman's friend, and I once tried to bring you to Cage many things.
Coming back. Hello. Good to see you.
I have a student coming today who's writing her Torah on Ruth. She only chose to study Ruth, chant from Ruth, and she's becoming bat mitzvah a month from today.
Hi. I remember your face. Yes. What's your name?
Shoshana Avivah.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, yes.
And I'm her mother.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Very good to see you.
I'm going to hear you lots of times because you're coming to KJ.
Right.
And you're coming to Stir
You'll get a
Brawl.
stir sheet. Yeah.
Right.
Lovely to see you.
It's so nice to do.
Thank you.
And a friend of mine is here reading.
Yeah.
And he's a teacher. He's a history teacher. And
Yes.
he was teaching us very biblical things. And I gave him your book to read. And he's not religious, he's a historian, he's not and so his pupils
Life is full of interesting things. Be angry at you.
This is turned on, but the speakers are turned off, so anything you say right now will not be broadcast, and I'll turn it on before you start speaking. So any secrets you want to tell?
Close down.
Hi, Avivah. This morning.
Hello.
I'm a reality interpreter at Teresa. Very excited.
Very nice to meet you.
Right there.
You're one of the people that I really, really like to see. How are you?
I'm okay. No, my husband died a couple of weeks ago. Oh, he didn't. You never know who heard it and who didn't. So. Yeah, no, thank God I have a lot of good friends and good community. And of course, I'm touched with 3 little kids. I'm 44, left with 3 kids in high school. So, it's, you know, well, he was 87. He had a good life. Yeah, tough life, but a good life.
And you miss him?
Yeah. But I wasn't going to miss this.
Hi. I'm gonna introduce you. So you want to take questions after you privately, right?
Yeah.
Okay, at 4:30. You're still floating in, but everywhere you're 3 o'clock. Wait 1 more minute, we'll start. Okay. Welcome everybody to Drisha, and we are very happy to be part of the larger celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut. This lecture by Dr. Zornberg is sponsored by Drisha and Darchei Noam together, but is part of the larger West Side community. Before I introduce Dr. Zornberg, just a couple of announcements about what's going on here at Drisha in the near future. You should be aware of the fact that in the summer We have extensive programming. We have 2 full-time programs, kollels, one in June, which is for men and women in college or just out of college. And in July, we have a women-only kollel, in addition to all the regular programs. And we also have a high school program for girls in the month of July. So if you know people who would benefit from these programs, they should be in touch with us. I also want to mention that we're doing a 3-part series on mental illness, which began this past Wednesday night. If you're interested in participating in that, please be in touch. There's not too much room, but there's still a little room left. And it's a very important program. It's co-sponsored with BJ, B'nai Jeshurun. So welcome to come and putting this issue on the table. I think is very important. The program's online. You can see what it entails, both workshops and a lecture. We're very privileged this afternoon to have Dr. Zornberg teach us. Dr. Zornberg is the author of many books on Bible. She has a doctorate from in English literature from Cambridge University. She's taught in a variety of places in the Jewish community, mostly in Israel, but she travels widely as well. So we're very pleased that she's here with us. Look forward to the lecture. After the lecture, if you have any questions, she's happy to come up after the lecture, and she'll be happy to try to answer your questions. Dr. Zornberg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Silber. Good afternoon, and almost Chag Sameach. So we have Ruth this afternoon, and Ruth is a stranger. The fact that she's also the great-grandmother of King David doesn't prevent her from always being a stranger. And there's the paradox. You can't have anyone who's more at the heart of the tradition. She is right there at the heart of the royal line. She's the source of the royal line. It sounds as if she must take her origin must be within that world. And it turns out, of course, this is the paradox, that she is not only a stranger, but she is self-confessedly the Nochriya. She is the one who describes herself as the strange woman, the unknown woman. And she does this in her first dialogue with the man who will become her husband. But at the moment she says it, that thought apparently could not have been further from their minds. She is poor, widowed, and not part of the Jewish nation. Not only that, she is a Moabite. And that's what makes her what I would call the quintessential stranger. As a Moabite, there is a verse in the Torah that bans her from ever entering the community of God. Lo yavo Amoni u'Moavi b'kahal Hashem. Verse in the book of Deuteronomy. No Ammonite or Moabite shall ever enter the community of God. And the day comes when, having followed her mother-in-law Ruth against all odds, we want to talk about that, having insisted on accompanying her mother-in-law back to her place of origin, she finds herself in a field. Vayikar mikreha. Chance takes her there. Right? That's exactly what it says in the text. Chance would have it. A very strange way of talking about the movement of God in the world. That's, after all, clearly, this is a religious text. And the people greet each other beautifully using the name of God. It's one of the things that gives the atmosphere to the whole drama. But the way the text describes this crucial meeting between Ruth and Boaz is under the aegis of chance. And chance took her there, and she found that particular field. And that man saw her, and he asked after her, and he then was very kind to her. He opened up the resources of the field to her. He told her how she should go about things. He helped her in a strange environment. Amid the alien corn, as Keats describes Ruth's dilemma, there she is weeping amid the alien corn. It's not the corn that's alien. She is alien to the corn and to everything around it. And then after he has been so kind to her, Vatishtachu arza, ותיפול על פניה ותשתחו ארצה. She falls on her face and she bows down to the ground. Tremendous attention to her humility and in a way her depression. As an expression somewhere of lowness. And she says, Madua matzati chen be'enecha, lahakireni va'anochi nochriya. Why have I found favor in your eyes to know me, to recognize me, to look at me, to see me, lahakireni, and I am a stranger. And I wanted you to hear the Hebrew, because the Hebrew gives you that sense of guttural sounds. מדוע מצאתי חן בעיניך להכירני ואנוכי נוכריה. Harsh sounds, sounds of pain, sounds of anguish. There she is, and what she has to say is not easy. I am, as far as you're concerned, I am nobody. How come you seem to see something in me? I found favor in your eyes. Something in your eyes has reacted to me. In spite of the fact that, according to tradition, Ruth is not particularly a beautiful woman. The evidence for that is that there's no mention of her being a beautiful woman, and that is almost a routine courtesy with biblical heroines, that biblical heroines are beautiful. Yeah, that she is yifat Torah, yifat mar'eh. It's a kind of minimal gesture on the part of the text to say that she's beautiful, but Ruth is never called beautiful. The sages, the rabbis, estimate that she might have been about 40 years old. Just think of that, ladies. Yeah, that's an age in which nothing interesting can ever happen again. So there she is. She is not a romantic heroine. Nevertheless, somehow he's recognized her. Something has happened here. And she asks Madua, why? What is this? And she speaks with a bitterness of strangerhood. Anochi nochriya. There is no possibility of my entering into this community. What it means to enter into the community is actually quite biological. It doesn't mean that she can't come and visit, and that she can't tour, she can do all kinds of things, but she can't marry into the community. That's the halachic understanding, the legal understanding of entering the community, lavo, to come in. To come in means to marry in. And there is no prospect of that. And I'm going to be very interested in the word lavo. A very plain, simple word. One of your basic arsenal of biblical words. Yeah, lavo, lalechet, lakum. There are various absolutely basic words. To come, to enter into. And I want to suggest that that word, in a way, stands over the whole story. The question of entering into a people, entering into a marital relationship, entering into a sexual relationship, lavo, entering into the world, to come into the world altogether. We'll see how this plays out. Meantime, she is barred. She is barred, and he has seemed to recognize her. What does she mean by saying, "Do you recognize me? And I'm a stranger"? The words actually have the same root. To know, lahakir, has the same root as the word for stranger, nun chafresh. It's almost lahankir oti. You have singled me out. You've estranged me. You've singled me out from everybody else. You've seen me as singular. That's what it means to know someone, to acknowledge them. Right? It's not just that you recognize them because you know them from before, but you don't see them just as part of the mass. That's what it is to acknowledge someone. And she is now here in her singularity, which is a painful singularity, very largely. And yet, he has singled her out on good grounds, apparently. There is an interesting understanding of this, what I call a kind of legalistic understanding, by David Dauber, who was an eminent legal scholar. He reads this with a sensitivity to biblical usage. And he says, what she is acknowledging here, what she is grateful for, is that he has acknowledged her status as a stranger. And as a stranger, that legally she is due certain rights and privileges. Now this is a kind of minimal reading, that she's thanking him for giving her the rights and privileges that are due to a widow, to a poor woman, to a stranger, when she enters into the field of a rich man. The corner of the field, the gleanings, there are certain parts, certain assets, agricultural assets, that are by law owing to this stranger. You have the laws in the book of Leviticus. And she acknowledges this, and she says, thank you for giving me, in a way, my dues. And in a way, it's an acknowledgement of the charitable nature of the culture that she is entering. Now, I would call that a kind of minimal, that's a minimal reading. Here's a maximal reading, just to shock us right away. You find it in number 1 on your page. What does it mean, recognize me that I'm a stranger? Number 1, Midrash Rabbah. She fell on her face, she bowed down to the ground. This teaches you, Shenit Nab'ah, Shehu Atid Lahakira Kederach Kol Haaretz. She prophesied, she foresaw in some way, she foreshadowed here, that he would indeed know her in the way of all the world. What is the way of all the world? Kederach Kol Haaretz, Derech Eretz. It means, of course, sexually. That doesn't mean necessarily that he'll marry her. It's a really much more raw description. That he would know her, using the word lahakir as if it's an extension of the biblical word ladat, which is used, the idea of biblical knowledge, that it can sometimes be used in a sexual context. If a man knows a woman. This is a really, what can I say, a daring, if not a brazen interpretation. Here you have Ruth, who is meeting this wealthy man for the first time. And in some sense, she is indicating to him, she's intimating something she intuits. Nit nab'ah. She has some kind of prophetic flash, and she tells him, we are going to know each other very well. Now, how do we take a statement like this? I find it actually rather troubling, but not for the obvious reason. I find it troubling because if she already knows that they are going to be together, then in a sense, all the drama of the book disappears. Nothing actually happens in the book. There is no becoming here. And what I'm interested in is the process of becoming, as you can see by the title that I gave the session, Becoming Ruth. Ruth can't know the outcome when she first meets Boaz in the field. That spoils everything on all kinds of levels. So what does the Midrash mean when it indicates a kind of foreshadowing? That in some sense there was a prophetic glimmer here, which she conveyed to him. You have this notion, this strange motif of foreknowledge, of knowledge of ultimate harmony, of ultimate coming together of things, in a situation that looks so very discordant at first, that there can be no peace, there can be no resolution here, there can be no coming together. And you have this motif over and over again in Midrashic comments on this book in particular. That's really the astonishing thing. Remez Ramazla. Boaz will say something that has a completely concrete, ordinary meaning. For instance, it's not so concrete. He will praise her and say to her, may your reward be perfect for the kindness you did to your mother-in-law. We've all heard how kind you've been to your mother-in-law. Your name has gone before you. It's one of the courteous things he says to her that creates a certain atmosphere. But he says to him, Maskortech shlema, may your reward be whole, be perfect. And the Midrash comes and says, really shockingly, here he hinted to her, Remez Ramazla, that Shlomo would be born from her, right? Not just that they're going to get together, but that 4 generations later, there's going to be a king called Shlomo who will come of her. Now, how does one take this kind of thing? Or at least, how do I take it? I mean, I'm sure there are other people who will take it very differently. I'm not going to take it as a full-blown knowledge, that she just knows that she's under the aegis of God, and if she's been brought here, then she knows exactly what's going to happen through all the generations. I'm not going to take it like that. Somehow, the Midrash wants to suggest that something is born at the moment that she first encounters Boaz. A certain process of knowing is born. something begins to glow between them. Now, you can call it attraction. Right? That's the word we want to use now. But there's a certain attraction that begins there. And yet, even though I have nothing against the word attraction, or the phenomenon attraction, I think it's not an appropriate word to use for the book of Ruth. They're neither of them young. I don't think that's the primary thing, that there's a kind of physical attraction. That doesn't seem right. There's a metziat chen. She has found favor in his eyes. That's true. But what is it that begins to glow here? What is it that glows between, to use that metaphor, between Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law? And there it becomes a very bright fire, in which Ruth refuses to go back home, even though her mother-in-law tries her best to send her back home for her own good. Yeah? She and her sister-in-law, Orpah, you remember the story. Her mother-in-law says to them 3 times. That's why we tell would-be proselytes 3 times. You know, we try to deter them. Shov na bnotai, return, return, my daughters. Return, isha beit ima. What could be more natural if you're thinking of returning, going home? Go home, each woman, to the house of her mother. Go back to where you came from, to your origin, your natural origin. And if you want to have a future, not only a past, but a future, you want to have a man in your future, isha lebeit isha. Each woman to the home of her future man, of her man. Right? It's very biological in a way. The sense of, I know what you must be looking for. And your past and your future would take you back to where you come from. There is nothing for you here. You cannot find a man here. So it's a play on the word isha. What is a woman? A woman is in quest of a man, as a man is in quest of a woman. So that way of looking at things leads to a meaning of the word return that's quite obvious. And what does Ruth insist on? Ki itach nashuv. That we will return to Beit Lechem with you. In other words, this is a metaphoric return. This is just a displaced return. She's never been in Beit Lechem. How can you return to Beit Lechem? Of course, you can say she wants to accompany Naomi, who is returning home. But the way it's put makes it seem as if Ruth now adopts Naomi and her origins. Your origin is my origin. And she goes on to say that in every leads me now into a little constellation of midrashim. I want to look with you at 3 midrashic sources, which personally I had never encountered before I was preparing this class, which I think takes us into interesting territory. You can look at number, if you will, at number 3, 4, and 5 on your page. And this is a cluster of midrashic sources. And it focuses on that midnight hour, the midnight moment when Ruth meets Boaz the second time. When she meets him the second time, it's dark. That's the first thing to notice. It's midnight. Chatzot halayla. That is, he can't see her at all. They are invisible to each other. And I would like to say that in a certain sense, Ruth is always invisible to those who see her. People don't really see her. That's the nature of a stranger. Boaz, who seems to see her, now it is midnight and he can't see her at all. So what do we read at that midnight moment? What is the effect of darkness on these two who are strangers to each other in a very real sense? She's sent down by Naomi to the vineyard, to the granary floor, and she arrives there at midnight. I'm reading from the text. And the man who is lying asleep, she lies down by his feet, and the man shuddered, vayecharad ha'ish, very strong word, vayilafet, and he feels himself gripped. Suddenly, he has a horrified awakening. Behold, there is a woman lying at his feet. So there is just a sense of a woman. Look, there is a woman. What did he think it was before he realized it was a woman? Hine means he suddenly realizes. What did he think it was? What made him shudder? His first reaction, Rashi says, he thought it was a demon. Shed. So suddenly we are transported into territory, granary floors at midnight, where demons roam and take revenge on those who have been too successful, have had too good harvests. Dangerous times, successful times. When you're doing well, you have a good harvest, you better watch out for the bad fairies. So there's an ominous sense somewhere. He wakes and he feels himself assailed by forces of darkness of some kind. Turns out it's a woman. That's the first thing he realizes, with some relief probably. Hine isha, it's a woman. And that fits into another mold, which is quite predictable. And that is, of course, granary floors at the time of the harvest, the wealthy landowner, somewhere the visit of passing prostitutes, zonot, you find it in other parts of the Bible. That this is, in a way, a predictable motif. Some prostitute has crept onto the floor there. He says, Mi'at, who are you? He asks her in her strangeness to identify herself. Who are you? And this is going to become a motif. He asks, who are you? And later, Naomi will ask, who are you? And both of them know her in a way. Certainly Naomi knows her, and yet asks her at a certain moment when she returns from this night with Boaz. The first thing Naomi says is, who are you? As if there is something irresolubly unknown about Ruth. That there's something about her that invites that question. And she answers, I am Ruth, your maidservant, and you shall spread your wing, your skirt, over your maidservant, for you are the Redeemer. Goel ata. So you notice what she's just done. Sorry?
Turns it back on him.
She turns her back on him?
No, she turns the thing back.
She turns the thing back on him, exactly. Yes. He asks her, who are you? And she says modestly, I'm your maidservant, Ruth, you remember. We did meet. She doesn't say, I'm Ruth the Moabite, notice, which she is called routinely throughout the book. That she doesn't want to present herself as Ruth the Moabite. I'm your maidservant, and you are the Redeemer. Now that's a little forward of her, one might say. She's answering his question, and then she's turning it around on him and saying, and you know who you are? You are my Redeemer. You are going to change the destiny of me and my mother-in-law. These two women who now have no men to link them to the society. And you are going to redeem the fields of my husband, and you are going to now reinstate us within society. So with great calmness, she has now given him an identity. He thought he had one, and she is now making it clear that he never knew what his true identity was. And he answers, Brucha at Lashem biti. Blessed are you to God, my daughter. In a way, answering his own question. He asked, who are you? And now, because of her answer, he says, I know that you are blessed. That I may not see your face in the dark, but I sense that you are Brucha. But there's something about the way you talk that means that you are blessed to God. There is a relationship to God here. And then he thanks her and acknowledges, it's the most astonishing moment, I think. He thanks her for her chesed to him. for her loving kindness to him, which is greater than her classic loving kindness to her mother-in-law. That's a paradigm chesed to her mother-in-law. But the way you are behaving to me is even more gracious than the way you are behaving. Now, what can he mean by that? That she has everything to gain from this relationship. He is the one who is being kind to her by acknowledging her and perhaps even marrying her ultimately. And yet he senses it in a reversed relation. That somewhere she is being, her way of speaking is giving him gifts. Is giving him gifts that he has never dreamed of. Now, what is this intimation that has suddenly passed between them? Let's have a look now at these midrashic sources, which are, to me, quite wonderful. Chatzot Laila, in the middle of the night. This is from one of the Psalms of David, 119. In the middle of the night, David says, I will rise up to give thanks to you, O God, for your righteous laws. It's a verse in Psalm 119. Midnight. Rabbi Pinchas says a detail about King David when he wrote the Psalms, when he sang his Psalms. When he slept at night, there were a lyre and a harp hanging over his bed. And when midnight would arrive, precisely at the hour of midnight, he would rise up and play on those instruments. In other words, implicitly, we're being given the modality in which David composes his psalms. The time of day in which he composed. All his psalms had their birth at midnight. That was his hour of composition. That was his hour of inspiration. The middle of the darkness. At that witching hour, yes, as Shakespeare calls it, when the witches fly free, on the one hand, the demons and the witches. And on the other hand, when God is present in a strange way, not in the daylight way. That's the moment when King David is inspired to wake and sing all his songs. And in his core feeling when he sings is giving thanks to God for his loving kindness, for his righteous laws. What is being referred to here? Another version of this midrash, the wind wakes David because the wind moves over the instruments, over the strings of the instrument, and the instruments play, and that's what wakes him. But now we move closer to the heart of our theme. Davar acher, I give thanks for your righteous laws. The laws, the legal side, is what you brought on the Ammonites and Moabites to ban them. But the righteousness, the kindness, loving kindness, is what you did with my grandfather and grandmother at that other midnight hour. Now, what a strange imaginative movement in the Midrash. Imagining David at midnight rhyming with the other midnight hour. That moment when his grandfather and grandmother met in the dark on the granary floor, and feeling that his midnight hour has a direct connection with that other midnight hour, that he emerged directly from that midnight hour. That's a tremendous imaginative leap. There's a big gap there, a gap of generations and a gap of different experiences, and there's so many, in so many ways. What does he say? If he had emitted one single curse, this is really quite weird, if he had emitted one curse when he was shocked by her arrival there on the granary floor, when he shuddered in traumatic response at her arrival, all that would have had to happen would have been a natural curse. As one says, get thee behind me, Satan, demons move away from me. And that would have been the end of that. The way he puts it is, where would I have come from? Me'ayin hayiti ba. There's that word, lavo. Where would I have come from? Meaning, how would I ever have come into the world? But what happened, in fact? Strangely, you, O God, put it into his heart, and he blessed her instead of cursing her. As it says, you are blessed to God, my daughter. That's what Boaz said to her. An intensely imaginative way of evoking that night. What do we have here? what should have been a curse, in terms of what's predictable, what's banal, what people do when they're suddenly shocked by something they think is threatening. It should have been a curse, suddenly turns into a blessing. If he had cursed her, then there would have been no marriage and no children from the two of them and no King David. And what David is doing here is, I think, what everybody does. I imagine this must be a universal. In childhood or beyond childhood, you've been brought up on the strange story of how your parents met. The strange and marvelous story of how they almost didn't meet. Yes, that's the usual version. That we almost didn't meet, but it seems to be more common than not. And then the child wonders at some point, but what would have happened if they hadn't met? What would have happened with me? And of course, I had to be. There's no question about that. Natural narcissism convinces you of that. I had to be in the world. And yet, even the child who hasn't studied biology has an instinct that I could only come of these two parents. I made the genetic material of these two parents. So if they hadn't met, what would have happened to me? And suddenly there is a sense of contingency, a sense of providence and contingency, which go together. It almost didn't happen, you might say. It must really have been meant to happen. Right? That's the feeling. And David asks the same question here. But he doesn't ask about their meeting. He asks about something that almost canceled out, almost neutralized the whole budding future, everything that was about to be. And it would have been a perfectly normal reaction on the part of Boaz. Just one curse. That would have been enough to destroy. What changed him from a curse to a blessing? Something incalculable. Something we can't understand it. It's called, you, O God, put it into his heart. In other words, whatever it is that makes people suddenly and mysteriously move from a destructive impulse to a constructive impulse, to say something good rather than something bad, where the bad thing is very tempting, call that God. I'd like to read it that way. You could say that's where God has paid a visit, that some kind of angel came there. Something came from your unconscious. There are all kinds of ways of talking about this. But the Midrash talks about you put it in his heart. And so now David devoutly thanks God for that midnight hour, for what the kindness you did to my grandfather and grandmother. Now, this is a stretch of imagination, which I think flies. There's something very fertile in it. There's something that really moves. David contemplating the genetic material out of which he's made. And I want to say the genetic material is not just the physical genetic material. It's that moment of the switch from a curse to a blessing. He's made of that movement towards. Look at the next passage, which amplifies this whole idea. Number 4. Cherdat Adam Yiten Mokesh. A quotation from the book of Proverbs. Human anxiety places pitfalls, but someone who trusts in God shall be exalted. If you are too anxious, if you're too petrified, then it places traps in front of you. You don't know exactly how to behave. But if you have a certain trust, then things smooth out. What's the example here? Charada, the shuddering, the trembling. Remember the word about Boaz, that he shuddered? There was another trembling, and that was the trembling that Jacob caused Isaac. Remember that story? When Jacob took the blessing that was due to his brother Esau from Isaac. When Isaac realizes afterwards what has happened, Esau is standing crying in front of him, deprived of his blessing. What do we read? A very intense description of Isaac's reaction. Vayecharad charadag gedola ad ma'od. And he shuddered with an extremely great shudder. You really can't have it more intense than that. What is that shudder then? Why is that? Why is attention drawn to that? But din haya, at that moment, it would have been according to law, meaning quite natural, absolutely predictable, fully ordered. It's in an ordered world, he should have cursed Jacob. It's absolutely predictable he should have cursed Jacob. He was so disturbed obviously, at that moment. He should have cursed him, and yet somehow he blessed him instead. And that's a mysterious blessing. Where did that come from? Everyone notices that. Why does he say in that moment, Gam Baruch Yeh? Indeed, he shall be blessed. Right? It's not at all what you would expect him to say in this situation. It's that mysterious move the Midrash says, calls, you put it in his heart to bless him. And the same thing happens with Boaz here at this moment, and the same logic is applied to it. That when he shudders, also, bedinhu, it was quite natural that he should have cursed Ruth, but God put it in his heart, and that's what happens when one trusts God rather than being overcome by anxiety, that the right instinct takes over, and he blesses instead of cursing. So it's in praise of trust. It's in praise of a certain kind of calm, inner calm, not being thrown off one's moorings too radically. And have a look now at the third one, which takes us further afield. Rabbi Yitzchak opened up. He quotes from another psalm, the 40th psalm. Az amarti hinei bati. Then I said, this is David speaking, then I said, behold, I've come. You hear that? Then I said, behold, I've come. Shira. Hayiti tzarich lomar shabati. It's a comment in the Midrash. I should have sung a song. I should have burst into song because I came. About the fact that I came. There's that word again. I came. What is David celebrating here? I made it into the world. That was so extraordinary. The fact that I actually entered the world. The fact that my great-grandparents actually, yes, same word, yes, that he came in unto her. That's the word that's used biblically, right? That there was a coming of that kind. Resulted in me, and so that I was able to enter the world. I should sing a song about that. Az Yashir Moshe. The word az already tells you that it's a song he's contemplating. So his whole life of singing songs, in a way, comes from a basic sense of wonder, a radical sense of wonder at his own existence. And it's a sense of wonder that's transferable. I think when we read that psalm, it wouldn't hurt at all for us to apply to ourselves something of that sense of wonder, because there were always obstacles. Maybe we don't know about them. Who knows about the private lives of one's grandparents, one's great-grandparents? Surely there were obstacles. And somehow, strangely, obstacles were overcome. And here I am. Az amarti hinei bati. Then, lyrically, I said, here I am. I must sing. And the Midrash goes on, quoting from the lines in the same psalm, to say something like this. Not only that, but it's written about me in a Megillah and in a Sefer. I have my fate forecast, foreshadowed, in both kinds of writing, in a book and in a scroll. Forecast in the negative and in the positive. The negative is lo yavo, Ammoni u'Moavi. There can be no coming of an Ammonite and a Moabite into the community of God. That's the negative. That's what barred me from ever entering. I was being referred to there. He takes it personally. He says, you know, that was a reference to me. He will never come. Right? That was the prophecy of doom, as it were. But on the other hand, you have, for instance, the book of Ruth, where at the end you have the line of names, and there is David. Or you have the book of Samuel, where David is first encountered by Samuel, and he doesn't look like a likely candidate for the king of Israel. But God tells Samuel, that's him. Nehu, that's him. Meshacheu, anoint him. That's the one. And you have similarly negative predictions and positive predictions in another set of texts, which I won't go into the details now. So here is David thinking of himself as having always been written in some ways. In some texts he was written and erased, and in some texts he was written and affirmed. Yes, you will indeed come. And somehow it worked out that he came, that he's here, that the positive overcame the negative. And shouldn't I sing about that. Isn't that subject for song? Now, why is Ruth called Ruth? Ruth doesn't know what's going to be happening in the future. I come back to that. If she has an intimation of some kind, it's certainly not in the form of full-blown knowledge. Why is she called Ruth? Now, it's hard actually to trace an etymology, as the Midrash likes to do, on her name. Reish Vav Tav is not easy to play with. But what could connect with that? The word lirot, perhaps. But notice what we have here. Why is she called Ruth? It's a wonderful etymology. Number 6. Ruth. Why is she called Ruth? Rabbi Yochanan said, because she merited, and there emerged from her David, Shirivehu lakadosh baruch hu v'shirot v'tishbachot. There emerged from her, yatsa mimena. Again, very physical in a way, very immediate. That there came out of her. Now, he didn't literally come out of her. It's several generations down. But it's the feeling that she unfolded into David. She opened up into the being of David. As if people are somehow, that people devolve from one another. People move out of one another. Se'etzaim, the word for offspring, se'etzaim, has as its root, it's the tzaddik aleph, the double meaning emerging. And I'm interested in emerging here. There emerged from her David, and who is David? He is someone who rivehu, riva, that's the connection with root. And that's a strange root, Hebrew root, which means to quench the thirst of someone. If you're thirsty and you drink, and it's called, larvot, to quench your thirst. She quenched the thirst of God with songs and praises. David did. David's great-grandmother is called Ruth because there came out of her a man who saturated God with songs and praises. Now, Ruth herself never sang a song, as far as we know. Right? We have no reference to Ruth the poet or Ruth the songstress. That's not Ruth. And yet, that's why she is called Ruth. As if to say, what came out of her must have been in her. It didn't find its full development in her. It came out eventually, over the course of the generations. The capacity to sing in this way. The capacity to do what David did. In other words, that a being, a self, is not just a self. And of course, that's true in the most obvious biological ways. That we contain within us the seeds of multiple futures. Yeah. On that level, it's obvious. But of course, the point that's being made here is not only on that level. That a self is also potentially all the selves of one's children and one's grandchildren, one's great-grandchildren, and the strange feeling that grandparents have when they look at their grandchildren. It becomes much more potent, I think, as the generations move on. They're your children, it's a different sense. But your grandchildren, your I don't know about that one yet, but it's a strange feeling of, that's a bit of me. That's a bit of me, but of course not entire, and so forth. She is called the one who sings in such a way as to delight God, even though she never opens her mouth in song. She contained that potential, becoming Ruth. When will she really become Ruth? There's really no knowing, because it could recede into the future. But what we do see is a becoming of Ruth in her own life, of course. What does it mean for her personally to need to evolve into the person who will be Ruth and who will enlarge herself and elaborate herself by meeting Boaz and by extending the family of her mother-in-law? It will involve a certain kind of merging of her personhood with the personhoods of others, which is, of course, the most difficult thing for a stranger to do. A stranger seems to carry a kind of, toxic toxic presence around them. They don't know the lingo. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to meld. They don't know how to become part of the environment. This woman, what does she do? The characteristic word, I think the most characteristic gesture of Ruth, is when she insists on staying with her mother-in-law, even though her mother-in-law, Naomi, doesn't really want her to at that point, really is trying to deter her. Her sister-in-law, Orpah, kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. That's the paradox. In other words, she kisses her affectionately and says, and now we will never see each other again. She accepts her separateness. But Ruth, dovka, but Ruth clings. She clings to her. Davek. She sticks. Now, clings is a very nice poetic word in English. And davek is a very nice poetic word in Hebrew. Va'atem hadvekim ba'Hashem, chayim kulchem hayom. You who cling to God are all of you alive today. Sometimes clinging can be the way in which you suffuse yourself with life. You share your life and you bring into yourself the life of what you're holding on to. It's a way of eliminating boundaries, of getting rid of boundaries. The very first description of a love relationship in the world, of course, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. The description is, of course, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother. Davak be'ishto. Right? There might have been other ways of putting it. It's a very striking, it's a sense of passionate intimacy. To let some of your barriers down, to allow yourself to stick. Stickiness can be a rather repellent experience. And I'm here thinking of Mary Douglas in her great book, Purity and Danger, where she talks about anomalous phenomena as being impure. Phenomena that are not exactly definable and clear and have clear boundaries. Like, for instance, Mary Douglas says, referring to Sartre, to an essay of Sartre's actually, like sticky stuff, viscosity, honey, glue, paste, which is neither liquid nor solid. Something that's liquid, it's good. You get your hands wet, drops off your hand, and you still have your hand. If it's something solid you're holding, put it away, you've got your hand. But if you get your hands in honey, there is a certain, what shall I say, a certain repellent, something repellent, about watching the honey drip off your hands or something very thick and gluey. You no longer know where you end and it starts. Suddenly your being is compromised in some way. How am I going to clean myself of this? And Mary Douglas says demurely that this, of course, is a subject of our first infantile experiments. That as children, of course, children delight precisely in getting their hands into sticky stuff. I won't be more specific, right? The stickier and the dirtier, the better. In other words, that which is impure is precisely that which is fertile for a child. You can do anything with it. But for an adult, we've got used to a certain kind of fastidiousness, that we want to keep ourselves clear and clean. Someone who is sticky, is compromising boundaries. And Ruth is a person who is clingy. She is a person who so passionately wants to be part of something that she senses through her mother-in-law. It's not only a personal love, it seems to me. It's something that through Naomi she senses. And she knows that that's the place to which she will return. That there's a return involved in this. And so she gets a little bit too close, let's imagine. That there is something about her approach, let's say to Boaz, certainly quite close in the end, when she comes down to the granary floor. Quite close, endangers herself, endangers her good name, and yet somehow emerges safe and with her true desire acknowledged. That is, this is not going to be a fling. This is not going to be something that happens during the night. This is going to be something that gains his respect, and he's going to understand the formidable presence and the formidable voice of Ruth, and he's going to acknowledge her true desire. Now, that she's playing it's a very fine line that she's walking on. It seems to me, paradoxically, that Naomi must have really begun to love her and to respect her if she was willing to risk her in this way. Now, that's a paradox. That before, she was not at all sure she wanted Ruth clinging to her. You remember the terrible thing she says as she walks into Bethlehem. She says, God took me out of here full, and he brought me back empty. And she says that with Ruth standing beside her. Ruth, who's cast in her lot with her, as if that makes no difference at all to Naomi. She still feels totally empty. But I think my speculation is, that something different has happened by this time. And she's willing, therefore, she realizes the stakes are very high, and she's willing to risk Ruth with her passion and send her down to the granary floor in this compromising situation. And sure enough, when she returns, Naomi asks her, Mi at, Biti, who are you, my daughter? Meaning, I know your name. Meaning, so who are you now? That is something, you are someone who's open to transformations. You are someone who's hungry, actually, for transformations. So I need an answer now. Who are you now? You are the unknown woman. What I'm sensing in the relation between Ruth and Boaz, particularly, as well as between Ruth and Naomi, is what I'll call an impersonal intimacy. Clearly there's an intimacy between Ruth and Boaz, even at this early stage. Impersonal, I mean that they don't know each other. You can't talk about a personal relation unless they know each other, or so we tend to think, at any rate. I can't have a real relationship with you because I don't know you, we say to each other. Whereas, in fact, of course, one can have quite a good relationship without knowledge. Such things have been known, not on the basis of the past, but on the basis of things intuited. What I'm calling an impersonal intimacy here. Sometimes there can be great power to that kind of relationship. And that's the relationship between Boaz and Ruth. They marry without knowing each other, without what you would call, in a normal sense, knowledge of each other. The example that comes to mind, the classic example, it seems to me, of that kind of intimacy, of a relationship, is mother and newborn baby. You can't call it a personal relationship in the usual sense, yes? The mother doesn't know this baby yet, let's say, especially if it's a new mother. She doesn't know how to do this. What is this to her? She may have a very strong feeling about the baby, but she doesn't begin to know the baby's habits, the baby's tendencies, what the baby wants, doesn't want, and the baby certainly doesn't know the mother, and perhaps never will. That's something else. It's not based on knowledge. It's based on a sense of what is potentially beginning to evolve between them. That the mother is all alert, is attuned to signs from the baby of who the baby is becoming, and who the baby is becoming for her. Yeah. And the baby, similarly, is also looking for clues, sensual clues, as to what is this presence. So there's a kind of learning process. There's a process that's underway that doesn't have to do so much with cognitive knowledge. It has to do with something very different. And the result is that this kind of attunement to the virtual being of the other, it's almost virtual. I don't really know yet who the other is. That attunement becomes the basis for transformations and for growth and for nurturing, for new things being born. What this implies, perhaps, what it involves, is a kind of divestment of one's own clear, rigid personhood. What the mother has to do, and it's a delicate and difficult process, especially, I suppose, now in an age where mothers very much want to hold on to their selfhood. They nevertheless have to accept a certain letting go of their own contours, of their familiar contours. This is who I am, and this is how I feel powerful. This is where I know my power to be in the world. And it's suddenly, in a way, a letting down of defenses and allowing oneself to become this new being who will be the mother of this baby. It's a process. Not an easy process for those who invest in power, for those who invest in their own power. For Ruth and Boaz, whatever power Ruth had as a Moabite, she now has to let go of. She has to find a different kind of power now, which is the power of desire. It's the power of what she wants for the future, what she senses in herself she wants. And that's the power that so convinces Boaz, that Boaz is so affected by, it seems to me. Of course, I would suggest that such a path is never entirely smooth. Perhaps the path of Ruth is not as smooth as I've just told it. For instance, there are legal issues, obviously, that have to be dealt with. And I don't particularly want to talk about that today. I'm sure that you're disappointed that I'm not going to talk about how they resolve the legal issue. I actually find it a very interesting resolution. It has to do with genderedness. As if, as a woman, she is not subject to that ban. And no one was in a position to understand that until Ruth turned up. In theory, that ban seemed to be ungendered. It was for men and women. But suddenly there comes a point, because of the convincing presence of Ruth, that you have to look again at the source, and the Beit Din decides, the court decides, but it doesn't say a woman, it says only a man. And I don't think that's just a kind of formalistic little machination. I think it actually has to do with the way Ruth comes across, with the softness of the way she comes across, the stickiness of the way she comes across, combined with a certain kind of strength. Nevertheless, even if the law allows her in, culture, habits, surely make it difficult for a stranger to find a way in. There's a poignant passage, I'll just gesture at it, in number 8 on your page. This is the Gra, this is the Gaon. Going back to that verse that we looked at before, at the beginning, she fell on her face and she said, why have I found favor in your eyes to recognize me, and I am a stranger? And the Gaon reads this, fleshes it out. And he says she is actually depressed here. She's falling on her face. She's dejected because she senses an ambivalence in Boaz. On the one hand, he's speaking nicely to her. On the other hand, he says, go stick with my maidservants. I'm relegating you to where you really belong. Don't start getting ideas. In other words, he's putting her in her place at the same time as he's being nice to her. She senses it in that very feminine place where women sense such things. She senses it as blowing hot and cold. And she says, Lo ida et kavanatcha. That's how the Gaon puts it. I don't know what you mean. I can't read you. You seem to want two opposite things at this moment. And for me, that really is quite evocative of the state of courtship. I won't say in the present time and place, but perhaps in all times and places, that women have found it difficult to read men and their intentions. What is it you really want? But I will say that this is the Gaon commenting on the particular tension of Ruth's situation. That on the one hand, yes, and on the other hand, no. There's a bracha, there's a klala, there's a curse, there's a blessing. Who knows at this point what is going to win out? And it's a particularly exposed experience for Ruth to be in that place. And one more midrash, by the way, number 9. Quite a wonderful midrash, again, I think. If a person does a mitzvah, does something good, he should do it with his whole heart. Well, that's a good principle. Illustrations. 3 illustrations, and I'll just focus on the one that we are talking about now. If only Boaz had known that day in the field that the Megillah, the text, would write about him, Vayitzbat la kali, that he took a pinch of dried dried wheat and gave it to her. A pinch, vayyitzbat, very unusual word, very precise. Between two fingers, he handed her a little drop of corn of wheat. If he had known that the Megillah would write that about him, he would have fed her fatted calves. If he had known the cameras were on him, he would have behaved very wholeheartedly. Because he didn't know the cameras were on him. He didn't know what the text would write about him. He only gave her the minimum. He gave her really very, very little. And in a way, this seems to be a kind of rebuke to Boaz, that he should have given her more, that he should have been more full-hearted to her, as we've just suggested. But here's the other side of it, it seems to me. The French philosopher Jabez, he has this sentence: the foreigner allows you to be yourself by making a foreigner of you. The foreigner allows you to be yourself by making a foreigner of you. Let me try to unpack that. The foreigner is doing you a favor because he encounters you, who are a fine, upstanding citizen, well known in your society, very clearly defined. Everyone knows exactly who you are. You know exactly who you are. But when you enter into some kind of interaction with the foreigner, you feel your own strangeness through her eyes, that she is looking at you as if you are a foreigner to her. And that's the favor she's doing you, that she's allowing you to detach yourself from your too well-known position. You know, you don't have to think about who you are. And suddenly you see yourself as exotic, as an object of wonder. Somewhere you could sing, right? You can see somewhere how strange you are, that you too are a strange person to somebody. Strangeness is a liability, we started off by saying. But it also opens up opportunities. Opportunities for desire, opportunities for wanting to grow towards something else. And in that sense, Ruth and Boaz are doing each other a favor. He is acclimatizing her and domesticating her and bringing her in, and she is making him strange to himself. If that's the case, then Ruth comes to a very happy end. The ending of the book is really triumph. She marries him, and she has this child, and then the genealogy follows, 2 different ways, down to King David, back to Judah, all with male names. That really is a sign of triumph, that she has made it into a society, and she has entered the male dynasty, which will be the royal dynasty, 2 different ways. But there is a problem. The only problem is that in doing so, in her triumph, Ruth disappears. We talked about her merging, but she merges with a vengeance. She's actually effaced from the text. There is no more mention of Ruth after the moment that Boaz marries her. Boaz marries her, and the the community congratulates Boaz on his bride, right, who is coming into your home, Haba'ah, who is entering into your home. And Naomi is then congratulated when the baby is born. And Naomi takes the baby into her bosom and becomes, as it were, it says actually Le'omenet, which means a wet nurse. All right, she can't be a wet nurse. She said that herself to Ruth a long time ago. Even if you waited around for me to marry someone, you really think it's going to... There's no possibility. And yet, strangely at the end, there's a surrealistic ending. Ruth doesn't seem to have her own baby. She gives she gives birth to the baby, and her mother-in-law adopts the baby. The baby now is nurtured and brought up. And the whole community congratulates Naomi and says, Yulad ben Naomi. Even that's the most surprising of all. A child has been born to Naomi. Yulad le. Doesn't say she gave birth to the child, but indirectly. It's as if, I almost say, it's as if Ruth is a kind of surrogate. That she was the carrier of the baby. But the baby now fully rejoins the line. Yeah? And where is Ruth? And I have to say, I find it painful. I find it really, is that the reward for Ruth's self-abnegation? One would hope that self-abnegation is not rewarded by self-obliteration. That she really disappears. There is a different way of ending the story. I'm going to offer a kind of alternative sequel to the story, which the Midrash offers, which really, I think there's a word for that. It's a paraquel. Not a sequel, but a paraquel. In other words, alternative ending. You can read this side of the page, or you can read the Midrash on the other side of the page. Why do I find this Midrash so seductive? Have a look. It's number 10 on your page. In the middle of the line there. Strong words. Lo meta Ruth HaMoaviyah ad shira'ata Shlomo ben Bana Yoshev v'dan dinan shel zonot. Ruth didn't die, Ruth the Moabite didn't die before she saw Solomon, her grandson, actually her great-great-grandson, sitting and formulating the law in the case of the harlots. Do you remember the harlots? Yes? I'll tell you the story of the harlots very briefly before we come back to the Midrash. The harlots case is the flagship case of King Solomon. That's the case that wins him his reputation as for wisdom and as a judge, as a wise judge. People are in awe of him after this case. Two women come to him. They happen to be zonot. It's a detail that's just thrown in there. They are harlots. They are mothers. Each has a baby. It's another mother-baby story. And during the night, one of the babies dies. The women come to court, and one of them says, that was my baby that was left alive, and she took my baby because her baby died. And the other woman tells the converse story. Yeah. No, it's my baby. Hers is the dead baby. That's the case. So we come back to the Midrash. Solomon was dealing with this case, and Ruth had not died before she witnessed that case. Now, you have to imagine, of course, that Ruth must have been a very old lady at this point. We're talking about a great-great-grandson here. She didn't die. She's been alive all this time. Never again, somewhere in a kind of marginal world, a world that's not quite in the real world. It's a dream world. I'd almost say she can't die until she sees this case. It's impossible for her to die. She is not satisfied. She hasn't yet found her place until she sees this case. What is this based on? Text in the book of Kings, first book of Kings, where the king, when this case is brought before him, he places a throne for the mother of the king, for the queen mother, that is Bathsheba, and she sat at his right hand. That refers to Ruth the Moabite, says the Midrash. Now, you notice what the Midrash has just done. In the text, it's very simple. The king places a chair for his mother, Bathsheba, at his right-hand side. There's only one woman sitting beside him, one mother, and it's at his right-hand side. And the Midrash comes and splits it and says he places a chair for his mother on one side, and on the right-hand side, there is this other woman who is Ruth the Moabite. So here is King Solomon, the great king of England, flanked by two mothers. What did I say? What did I say? This is the beginning of my trip. Okay. I can't believe it. Okay. Here he is flanked by these two mothers. One is his real mother, and one is his great-great, who just happens to be around still. A kind of spectral presence, I would say, a ghostly presence at his right-hand side. And he faces now two harlots, which might make us think that after all, there was something of harlotry in Solomon's mother, in the story of Solomon's mother, in the way in which David and Bathsheba were united. Yes. Something, a shadow there, some kind. And there is something of harlotry about Ruth, that she comes from a nation, Moab, which is known to be a nation of zdut, of harlotry. That's one of the reasons it's forbidden that there should be any intermarriage between the two races, between the two nations. That is, somewhere in all his glory, here is the king of Israel, shadowed at either side by these two women with their shadows, with something there. And here are two harlots in front of him. How does he decide the case? On what basis does he decide the case? He can't do it in the normal judicial way, which has to do with analyzing the facts, analyzing the past, right, where there are no blood tests, there are no ultrasounds. There is no way in which he can look at the data and say, yes, this is what's in place, and that's how I see clearly who the right mother is. What does he do? You remember what he does, yes? He says, take a sword and cut the baby in two. That's a sublime, a Daniel come to judgment, right? A sublime act of justice. Gzoru, cut. Cut is the act of justice. Gzera. Cut it in the middle. Divide the assets. That's how you divide. That's how you divide in a case of doubt. And the false mother says, right, neither she nor I shall have the baby. At least that's fair. Gzoru, cut. In other words, accept the rational force of law. And the true mother says, Tnu la et hayalut hachai. Give her the living child. Vahamet lo timituhu. But don't kill it. Kill, don't kill it. Curse, don't curse it. In other words, there's a decision for life, even at the cost of losing the baby. Obviously. I mean, it's not even pathos, I would say. It hardly qualifies for pathos, because it's obvious. What would a mother say? And how does King Solomon decide now? Remember what he says? How does he frame his verdict? He says, Tnu la et hayalut hachai, v'hamet lo timituhu. Give her the living child, and absolutely don't kill it. Just quotes what she just said. He imo. The woman who just said that is the mother. So you notice the ambiguity, right? How he adopts her words and turns them around now to the case and says, now give her, not the one that she meant, give the one who spoke, the baby, the living baby. Absolutely don't kill it. How has he decided here? Not on the basis of any facts in place before he creates a situation. What he does is create a situation. He does something provocative. He creates a drama with dire possibilities. Take the knife and cut. He really is, in a way, he's running a risk. What if both women agree? it's a kind of shocking movement into the future, and let's see where things fall, how things fall. And that risky way of proceeding then becomes, as I'm saying, his flagship case. It becomes a way of daring to become, daring to open things up into a future that you don't yet know. You don't yet know what will be the result, but you have the courage to open things up. Where does he learn that from? It seems to me that the reason that the Midrash puts Ruth into the scene here is because the Midrash wants us to think that he learns it from Ruth, his great-great-grandmother. That she had that kind of wisdom, the wisdom that opens things up, that clings, that goes out into a place that is not entirely hospitable to her. And that kind of chesed, I think chesed includes very importantly the idea of courage. Loving kindness is not just a softness, it's a kind of courage. It's a courage to put yourself into a difficult situation where you may not be so welcome, and the courage somewhere to let down your defenses as well. And somewhere Ruth remains now as a chosen ancestor on the part of Solomon. Robert Cover, the legal theorist, says somewhere that choosing an ancestor is no simple business. That your mother, you can't choose. It's very clear who your mother is. But there are other kinds of ancestors where you do choose. Which one of your many ancestors do you really want to adopt as your ancestor? Where do you think you really came from? And Solomon thinks that he comes from Ruth. Ruth can now, one might say, she can now depart. She can now depart the world. What has she just seen? The idea was that she should see this. She can't die till she sees this scene. What she has seen is Solomon owning her, adopting her as an ancestor. And what she has seen also, I want to put it this way perhaps, that she has seen that he has come to his decision knowing that her eyes are on him, that she's had that experience, that he has come to the decision and he deliberately put her beside him so that in some way she would guide him in coming to this decision. And once she sees that, she's ready to leave. At that point, she doesn't have to have actually physically nurtured the baby, because there is a sense that now the merging that has happened between herself and the future still bears the Ruthness of her, still bears who she is, that will last in the way of the royal line, through the way of the royal line, into the future. There's something about all this, I just add as a kind of very brief coda. There's something about all this, about the risks of chesed, about the unknownness of the unknown woman, that for me carries over into the time of the year when we read Megillat Ruth. Whatever happened to the baby? Oh, this baby. Well, this baby presumably survived with the right mother, but after a crisis. Yeah. Let me just finish first, and then what I have in mind is the moment of the giving of the Torah. That the moment of giving of the Torah involves a chesed of this kind. Traditionally, we stay up overnight, learning, as if to say, in order to receive Torah, we don't stand waiting for someone to come and give it to us. We actually go out of our way. We go out of our way and we start doing it already. Right, we're learning Torah before we've been given it, as it were. We are already involved. We already made a leap. We are already right in the thick of it. We're in the middle of it. So that the moment of receiving Torah takes place in a context of relationship. That we are already in it. We are already there. There is desire. There is already a reception, even before there is a gift. And that sense of things, I think, gives us the feeling that the Torah, in a way, is always very familiar to us and always unknown to us. Very familiar and beloved, and at the same time, a sense of I can never really know it. I can never really just relax and say, oh, well, I know that already. That's old hat. But there's always that eagerness. There's always that sense of wanting to move in and wanting to come into a different place. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And Dr. Zornberg's books and CDs are available at the front.
I saw you the other night.
You did,
I
yes,
did,
that's
I saw
right.
it.
Yes, I saw you too.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to
Thank
say
you.
thank you